Hi, everybody. Welcome to another edition of Voices from the Field with the Supervisor Support Network. I'm Laura Beaver, and I am here with Suyapa Ulloa. And she's going to share a little bit about her experience as a supervisor and talk a little bit about kind of what she's been seeing in the field. So, thank you so much for being here today. Do you want to just tell our audience a little bit about yourself and your practice and kind of what you have going on?
Yes. Well, thank you for having me. So yes, my name is Suyapa. I'm an LCSW in California and Nevada, but I am physically living in San Diego, California, and that's where I offer in-person services. I've been a clinical supervisor for what, like maybe 4 years now, and been doing individual therapy well, specifically my niche is working with adults that have disabled siblings, or siblings that are struggling with struggling with mental health challenges, and or substance misuse. And more specifically in the like Latinx, Latin population, because I have lived experience through that. So that's been my niche. And yeah, and I've been licensed since 2018.
Awesome. I love that niche because I think it's an interesting where I practice. We call that stuff like the other side. So like the other side of, being a person that's living with a disability, the other side of like, being a family member or someone
Yeah.
struggling with addiction or substance use, like the other side, how the family is dealing with it. It's such a needed place.
Yeah, I feel like it's not something that we really like pay a lot of attention to or how
Mhm.
it affects other family members. And if anything, a lot of the attention gets drawn to the person that's struggling, which that's valid and granted, right?
Yeah.
At the same time, it's making room and space to really like take care of everyone in the family too, and not that someone feels like invisible, so to speak.
hmm Yeah. So why don't you share a little bit about how you got into being a clinical supervisor and what originally drew you to having that role?
Yeah, so I've had an interest in doing supervision, I would say like maybe a few years before I actually got licensed. I would say the reason being was the clinical supervisor I had at that time, which her and I are still really good friends to this day. I really enjoyed her style and just how personable she was. And I think I hadn't had experiences like that with supervisors before. So I started to think about it. However, I still felt obviously very fresh and new in the field. So after gathering quite a few work experiences in different types of populations, I thought I was like, okay, you know what? I think I have the skills and ready to jump onto clinical supervision. And I did that full time for almost 2 years for a nonprofit. And I really enjoyed just working a lot with like BIPOC
Mhm.
clinicians, just because I felt like that was something that I didn't see a lot as a supervisee. So that's kind of what drew me in.
Yeah. Would you mind sharing a little bit about what you see as the difference between being a supervisor when you're like at a place of employment versus being in an independent private practice?
Oh, yeah, such a good question. From my personal, I'll just speak from my personal
Yeah.
experience. When you're working for a nonprofit or somewhere else, you are tied to their like policies or legalities or politics and how things are ran, and there's different expectations. I think a lot of nonprofits and or county funded places have to have like evidence-based, and I use air quotations just because that's how people get funded,
hmm
right? That
Yeah.
it's research-based and backed up in that way, versus alternative non-westernized approaches don't get that much, like you don't teach that often about around that stuff, or really that doesn't get funded, so uh that's the cool and flexible and freedom part of doing it on your own individually outside of, working for someone else versus on your own as a private practice person, that you can really align with supervisors that want to learn with that type of style, that are wanting to learn that kind of approach, so to speak, without being tied to someone telling you, no, you can't do that, if that
Mhm.
makes sense. So.
Yeah. Yeah. I think there's a real unique difference between being at like a place of employment versus, someone that is in private practice or in a more sort of like independent type setting. That doesn't
Yeah.
always get talked about when we like do like supervisor training necessarily, right? So,
For sure. And I think too, the other part of that is even if I were to supervise someone who is working at a nonprofit or for like county funded place, I still do have to be mindful of how that supervisee will be affected working under, an employer such as that. So there's still some kind of tie, I guess,
mhm,
to that,
yeah.
but not as much as if you were working in the actual like organization.
Yeah. Yeah. So, what are some of the things that you have found that you really enjoy about being a clinical supervisor?
Honestly, I think it's getting to know supervisees and kind of like what brought them into this field. I feel like the majority of us like get into this field from our own personal like, life experiences. And I always ask supervisees that because there will be not only a time, maybe multiple times in your career where you're going to question like why I'm in this field. And it's like sometimes it's good to remember your why, So
Mhm.
I think it's, yeah, getting to know them, like, and I honestly learn a lot from them too, especially like the younger generation. Like, you know, the there I just feel like it's just a different generation from like when I was going to grad school and being in internships and stuff versus like the newer generation and now. So I really enjoy that part, and engaging with supervisees that want to learn and that ask
Yeah.
really great questions and are so insightful and so um, smart, clinically like smart, So that's the part that I really enjoy.
Mhm. Yeah, I love that you point out that like having building that connection to the why, because right, of course, there's gonna be days that we wonder, what am I doing here? Do I
Yeah.
even like people anymore?
Yeah.
um,
Yeah.
and remembering what that why is. And I think part of like a job of a supervisor, which you're getting at too, is a little bit of like we have to learn and grow in the process as well. It's not like we're this rigid, vault of information that we have to be learning and growing in the process too, which is so important, and makes a great experience for a supervisee when they have a supervisor who understands and is willing to do that.
Yeah, I think that's really important to kind of like at least for me to acknowledge like the power like dynamic and difference in that and be like hyper aware of like how that plays into our dynamic and roles, right? And not to take advantage of that, but more so like how can I level with this person and like I respect them even if they're not seasoned like I am or something, like there's still like respect there and value there. So,
Yeah, yeah. And what do you think are some of the challenges that you've seen in being a supervisor?
yeah, that's a really good question. I think from my experience is it sometimes can feel like you have like you're raising your own kids. And you have different kids with different personalities,
Yeah.
and then you're just like managing that and trying to like, okay, this person operates this way, this is how their personality is, and very different from this other person. And so I think there's a duality of like there's beauty in that and also challenges, right? Because like
Mhm.
me as a supervisor have to be very like I don't know if flexible is the word, but fluid, I guess, like with different peoples and their personalities. I think the other part too is I think the most challenging thing that I've faced as a supervisor was having to have hard conversations around like, I don't think this is working.
Mhm.
And I don't know if, maybe you need a little bit more extra time in learning more versus more in-person experience, just because I could see damage that was happening. And so it was really, yeah, hard to have those like heavy, uncomfortable conversations with the other person.
Yeah. Yeah, I think well, you bring up a couple of good points. One being it is so hard to meet everybody's needs. Because I think we
Yeah, like a
probably feel
mom,
that with,
right?
yes, we might feel that in if we have our own families, we might feel that. And then at work with clients, trying to meet clients' needs. And then you have supervisees that all might be learning, have different learning styles or are in different settings. And it can feel like yeah, fluidity. We have to have a lot of fluidity, right?
Yes.
And that can be challenging, especially if we're not expecting it at first in supervision. um and then the other thing about hard conversations, this is something that somebody brought up the other week that I was talking to, and it's so interesting because I find for myself having a hard conversation with a client feels so different than having a hard conversation with
Yes.
like a student or a supervisee. It just feels different, and it it's hard. I think it's harder. I think that's kind of a little bit of what you're verbalizing, is it's a different kind of challenge in that way.
Yeah. Yeah, I think for me it was just because like it wasn't anything like personally against this person, right? Like, and I could only imagine on the receiving end how it can like feel receiving that kind of like feedback, and at the same time like I knew that I had to like remain like anchored or strong and kind of stick to what I was saying and kind of providing, examples, and it wasn't like it was like multiple, feedbacks throughout
Yeah.
the academic year kind of thing, so yeah, like that was tough, but I knew that it was also needed.
Hmm. And that's such a huge part of our role with supervision, is being a gatekeeper for the profession and knowing that um, we're that the profession itself is headed in a direction where we're upholding, those values and our code of ethics and all of that, which can feel like a heavy lift. It
Responsibility.
is,
Yeah.
yes,
Yes.
yes. Um, but I think that's one thing that's one of the reasons I feel so passionate about supervision, is that it is such an important part of, so, social workers were, for us, counselors and LMFTs, we all kind of have our own thing, but in social work, I think that's a big part of what's ingrained in us, is being part of this like lane of the mental health world, is really making sure that we're all kind of holding each other accountable, whether we are already licensed or we're trying to get, we have that pre-licensure piece as a student, or we're trying to get our clinical license, all of those things.
Yes, I 100% agree.
Yeah. So have you noticed, do you feel like there's pieces of supervision that have changed over the past 4 years, and kind of what have you observed?
Um, yeah, I mean, I think like I was mentioning earlier, like generationally, I do see a big difference in the students or supervisors that I've worked with. I mean, like for example, like me and other coworkers have talked about this before, where it's like when we were in grad school, like we would bend backwards, to get any opportunities that were given to us unpaid or volunteering. And we had this mentality that was like, we have to be grateful for these opportunities that are given to us. Which, looking back at it, I'm like, that's not really healthy either. But like this new generation, at least from my experience, it's they have boundaries, which like I
Hmm.
love, and it's like, no, I'm not gonna overwork and not get paid to do extra work. Like I also have to take account into my like mental, emotional like capacity and all that stuff. When I think when I was going through grad school and internships and all that, like that was very like last, like I left it to the last and just was very focused on, work and experience and all that. So I don't want to say there's anything like wrong, right or wrong about that.
Mhm.
I just noticed that difference. And I think some people have a problem with supervisors coming with that, different, I guess, culture, so to speak.
Yeah.
However, for me, I'm like, to me, that's a strength because that is something that I think I missed out in my younger, greener days. To really prioritize also my mental emotional well-being. Because if you don't, then how can you show up for others, right? Um, so seeing that I think has been refreshing and also like very surprising for
Yeah.
me. So yeah, I don't know if that answers the question, but that's the first thing
Yeah.
that kind
And
of came to mind.
I absolutely love your perspective on that because I think so much of what is kind of the rhetoric that's kind of out there is sort of a negative perspective on like the current generation of like students or people coming out of graduate school that are like in that sort of like typical track of education. And the fact, like, I love that you're like, no, these are boundaries that they
Yeah.
have.
Yeah.
We maybe didn't learn how to have those boundaries and we're trying to walk it back. Um, and the idea of like kind of going back to grad school with social work, this idea of service, it's like
Yeah.
service at the expense of ourselves, I think is a lot of where
Exactly.
that was originally taught. And I think there's a huge shift in that of like we can value service and want to provide quality, ethical, all of the positive things of in service to our clients, but it doesn't have to come at a personal cost to
Exactly.
us.
Yeah,
um
because that's how we get burnt out so quick and early, right?
yes. Yeah, and I think for you as a supervisor, recognizing that that's what's going on is so valuable for those supervisees because I think like burnout can start in supervision, right? Like that's when people start to get burnout when they're doing so much, in
Yeah,
social work. And I know LPC is similar, like it's hundreds and hundreds of hours that we're doing in the field without getting paid when you're in
yeah,
school. And then you kind of go into the field, you kind of got to quote unquote do your time. But to have boundaries during that time and to like take care of yourself so that you're not like getting to that point where, oh, I finally have my LCSW and now I don't really know
I'm
if this is
done.
what to do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's so exhausting, the whole process. I mean, I remember when I got licensed and I was like, wait, I'm already tired. And I'm like, and I just got licensed. Like, so yeah, I think it's very important to, start early on and recognizing those things because yeah, you will face burnout a whole lot quicker for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, if people wanted to try to connect with you in your practice or, with you as a supervisor, where can they find you?
Yes, so you can find me on my website. It is Suyapa Sue Therapist. So my name Suyapa Sue SU, and that's in Spanish. So that means yours. So Suyapa your therapist. So it's suyapasuetherapist.com. And that's also my Instagram handle, same name. And yeah, those are the two places that you can reach me at.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for your time. I loved what you had to say and appreciate you sharing your experience. And I know that it will definitely resonate with other people.
Yes, thank you so much for having me, Laura.
All right.